Ja, guten Abend, meine Damen, meine Herren. Ich freue mich sehr, Sie heute wiederum in der Aula begrüßen zu dürfen zur zweiten Ringvorlesung in diesem Semester. Ich werde jetzt gleich in die englische Sprache übergehen. Das hat damit zu tun, dass unsere Rednerin heute Abend, Professor Christine Musselin, zu Ihnen auf Englisch sprechen wird. Was damit zu tun hat, dass mein Französisch nicht gut genug ist, um das auf Französisch jetzt weiter zu tun. Und wir werden aber auch im Folgenden für diejenigen von Ihnen, die dem Englischen vielleicht nicht nur folgen möchten, es wird auch eine Simultanübersetzung auf Deutsch auf dem Bildschirm geben. Also da haben Sie auch die Möglichkeit, dann im Deutschen dem Vortrag von der Kollegin zu folgen. Ich freue mich sehr, Sie heute Abend begrüßen zu dürfen. Einige von Ihnen waren vor 2 Wochen ja hier. Da habe ich die Ringvorlesung eröffnen dürfen mit meinen Szenarien. And when I took you into those scenarios about the future of Justus-Liebig-University 2 weeks ago, I tried to make the point that these are potential futures, possible futures for this university, but they're not accurate futures because obviously the future is up to us to write it together. The futures I presented to you are based on some of the realities with which we have to grapple and which surround us every day in our country, but also some of the opportunities we might have and we might be able to use are quite real as well. And still, it's important for us to face our future together and to think a little bit about those focus points I try to point out at the end of my lecture. Now, I'm very glad this evening to be able to welcome you, Professor Musselin, and my dear colleague, Professor Edith Braun, in a moment will give you an in-depth introduction to our esteemed colleague and her academic background. But I'm very happy to open with you tonight the part of this lecture series where we take an outside view, where we have people, international colleagues, people with external perspectives coming into our university and tell us a little bit about what they see from their vantage point, what they see happening in higher education, and where they might see opportunities for our shared future. And Christine Musselin tonight is going to kick us off with, I think, a topic which has been very close to all our minds, at least, perhaps not our hearts, but surely to our minds in recent months, and this is the relationship between universities and the state. And as it's become very aware, or very, very apparent for us over the last few months, I think, is how much we depend on the funding we receive from our state in the way in which we then can think about how we want to shape our future. And so I'm very much looking forward to your insights and your ideas you bring with you. And we have an opportunity afterwards for discussion, both for people online to ask questions, but then also for people here in the room to ask and grill our esteemed speaker, but perhaps also sort of share some ideas with you. So with that, I now hand over to Edith Braun for the introduction of our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, our President, Frau Lorenz, for this introduction. And I think it's our honor, but also our pleasure, to have Professor Christine Musselin here in Giessen. She is a research professor and a director at Sciences Po at the French National Center for Scientific Research, now Emerita, and still very active in the scientific community and sought for her expertise. She's one of the most internationally renowned researchers in the field of higher education research. She has an excellent network in the social sciences and beyond. She had several prestigious positions around the world, such as the Harvard University, the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium, but also in Germany as the Max Planck Institute for Study of Society in Cologne, at INSCHA in Hessen, and at the Wissenschaftliches Zentrum in Berlin. Furthermore, she is very supportive in her teaching. In example, she has supervised 15 completed PhDs and continues to supervise doctoral students still. I cannot list all the awards and received positions you've got and all the memberships in influencing associations, but the list is very impressive. And it is clear that you have an excellent knowledge of the European higher education system and its specific national characteristics, as well as the situation worldwide. That is why your expertise is so sought after. Our university, and I think we are quite exciting and very proud that we are quite successful at the moment in the Excellence Initiative, and we all hope for the best for the future for our university. Because we are also facing major challenges at the moment because of the state of Hessen had cut down the budget by around 10%. This corresponds to the current global trend of an increasingly anti-science attitude. We all know that especially in times of increasing populism, a scientific understanding and a critical attitude that seeks evidence are one important outcome of higher education. At the same time, the German higher education system is being called upon to find solutions. And I myself am curious to see how exactly the relationship between teaching and research will change and whether greater competition in the field of teaching can develop constructive forces. It will be a challenge to offer excellence teaching without losing the connection to research, so as not to become a community college. I know we will hear a little bit about the German chair system, where professors have the responsibility, and that is why we need the professors to attain a positive change in Germany. I know that when specific problems arrive, simple solutions cannot be expected. And so I would like to make it clear that we do not expect answers to our specific questions at the moment, but we therefore are all more pleased that we are receiving input from an international context, particularly from our neighbors in France, and that this comparison are enabling us to develop an even better understanding of the strengths of the German higher education system and the areas where we can improve. I warmly welcome you, and we are all looking forward to your presentation, What Drives the Change? Evolution of the Interplay Between the University and the State. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very nice introduction. Ich bedanke mich für diese Einladung. Leider wäre es mir zu schwierig, meinen Vortrag auf Deutsch zu halten. Ich wollte sagen, dass Sie Fragen am Ende im Deutsch stellen könnten, aber das brauchen wir nicht. Ja, das ist damit sehr wunderschön. So, I'll turn to English now because it will be easier for me to speak English and to present my talk like that. Just a moment, yeah. Oops. Is it okay? No. Okay. So, in this contribution, I will first of all deal with France, but with many references to Germany. What I would like to say is that I also try to give a historical perspective to the point I would like to develop, and I thought when I prepared it that it will be interesting to have comparison and history at the same time, so that we can think of the present situation with the past in our head, but also compare the two countries as much as possible in a way to reflect on the situation today. So, in France and in Germany, and that's the reason why I focus on these two countries, not only because I know them better, I think, than the others, but also because, as in many other countries, public universities are mostly funded by public money. It means that in many cases, and that's the case in France and Germany, academics are civil servants. So in Germany, I know there is a distinction between Beamte and Angestellte, but nevertheless, they are paid by the state. And even in countries where like in the US, non-for-profit universities are the most prestigious, we shouldn't forget, and the recent months showed us as much as important it is, that the research in these countries is deeply relying on public funding, and that's what is happening right now in the US, so it's the problem of that. So, sorry, may I stop? There is a message coming all the time. No, I will do it. I think that's, no, doesn't matter. I think it's the Wi-Fi who is trying to find me, and sorry. So I think that for that reason, it's very important to look at the relationships between universities and the public authorities. It's central to understand the role of higher education. I will try to develop the following points. I will go very far away, up to the French Revolution and the beginning of the 19th century, just to remind us how different our two systems were. Then I will try to show that they kind of converge more in the 60s, but that they were still quite different when I studied for the first time universities for my PhD in the 80s. And then I will finish with more recent transformation. First, the fact that our universities have more and more institutional autonomy, but at the same time are expected to be more and more accountable for the money they receive. And I will finish with the idea that the state has become a competition organizer in our two countries. And I will have some concluding remarks if I still have time. So I will start with the two very diverging paths for our two countries at the beginning of the 19th century. In France, you may know it or not. Many French do not know it, so it's very interesting. Universities have been suppressed by the French Revolution. There were corporations, and they decided to suppress all corporations, so they were suppressed. And it's only with Napoleon that, again, the facultés, Fachbereiche, are reopened. In between 1793 and 1808, they developed a lot of grandes écoles, the grandes écoles we still have now. So that's the beginning of this period of creation of grandes écoles. But Napoleon decided to recreate or to reopen the faculté, but it didn't choose to have universities. He put all faculty together under the umbrella of a single university, the Imperial University. So we had faculty but no universities, okay? A university but no universities. And the principal role of the faculty is to train students, very few students in fact, and to deliver degrees. And if we looked at sciences and humanities, these faculties were not really existing. It was much more a kind of expansion of the lycée, the gymnasium. So the professors in this faculty were at the same time professors at the lycée level. So something quite curious, I would say, and the control of the state all over the 19th century, not only during the Napoleonic periods, was quite strong. They were controlling from Paris, of course, the curricula and the careers of the academics. So they were quite depending on the ministry. Many reforms have been held at the end of the 19th century, after the defeat of the French against Germany in 1870. These reforms were strongly supported by the academics at that time. Many of them spent some time in Germany and came back to France with some notes that they sent to the French minister, telling him how nice Germany was and why we should look at the way they are organizing. Professors were doing teaching and research. They had autonomous universities and so on. So a strong support from academics, but in fact, these reforms rather failed. So we had much more students. It's really the beginning of a higher education system from this point of view, but the faculty remain the main pillars of the French system. The deans were the interlocutors of the ministry. We had no university president. A civil servant was placed at at the head of the universities, not an academic. And on top of that, teaching remained the central activity of universities, so that in the 20th century, recreated research institutions. So CNRS is probably the best well-known, but then we created the INSERM, the INRA, and so on, in order to develop research in France. Not in universities, but outside the university, or at least there were very few research activities in French universities. Completely different scenario in Germany, with the Humboldtian model, which is designed by a group of philosophers, and which began in 1811 and becomes the German model. So if you are an historian, you know that the Humboldtian model has never been really implemented. We have a variation of this model right now, but also in the 19th century. But nevertheless, there are some figures of this model which are very important. First, the discipline-based Fachbereiche are locally placed under the umbrella of a university led by an academic. So very different system from the French system with our Fachbereiche, who are depending on a central unity. The professors are the central pillars of this model, and they are expected to articulate teaching and research activities. Again, big difference with the French system. And the principle of Freiheit von Forschung und Lehre is protecting the academics from the state. So again, something which is very different from what I described in the French system. Nevertheless, I see some convergences between the two countries at that moment. First, universities as organizations are not expected to play a central role. For the case of France, it's very clear because it's the faculty which are the main pillars of the systems, not the universities. But even in Germany, it's not really the university as an organization which is important, but much more the professors, which are the central unities, the central units of the system. And so at that time, I would say that university can be qualified as a hollow organizations, that the terminology used by Richard Wiltley, and they are arms of the state. There is also a convergence in the expectations that are put on universities, and they have to participate to the building of the nation very clearly. So they have to participate in the construction and diffusion of collective narratives. They have a strong role in that. It has been shown many times by historians. They try to diffuse and impose a national language. They define the boundaries of the country, but they also train, and that's very important, the civil servants for the nation state. So even if the systems are very different, the expectations which are put on the universities are quite similar, and that's something that will be quite recurrent in my talk. Different systems, but nevertheless same expectations from the state. So I drop and I jump to the 60s in order not to be too long, because I think that with the students' movement of the late 60s, many convergences began to happen between the two countries, much more than before, let's say. So, sorry I speak about France again, but we had a very important reform immediately after 1968 and after the students' movement of May 1968, and this is called the FOR Act in November 1968. So, before the students' movement, a lot of reflections had been developed in France about the transformation of the higher education system, but none of them had succeeded really. So this new act will build a lot on these reflections, and especially the Caen colloquia in 1956 and 1966. But also, and that's interesting, the ministry took a lot of notes of what was going on during the students' movements and the proposals that were made by some committees at that time. And they also took that on board when they thought of this, when they conceived, where they designed this act. The most important thing in this act is that the former faculty are suppressed. That's written in the act. And they want to create pluridisciplinary universities. And these universities will have new status. And if you look at that, you can see that they are much more convergent with the German system at that time. The basic unit is not called faculté, because of course we don't want to come back to the old language, even if we still use this term today. But so they are called UER, Unit of Teaching and Research. They are supposed to be pluridisciplinary. Very important and very new in the French system. Each university is led by an elected president who is an academic. That was not the case before. As I said, it was a civil servant. And it's also written in the law, administrative, budgetary, and pedagogical issues should be led autonomously by universities. It never happened really, but in fact, it's written in the law. So it's a very important reform, but with limited implementation. As I just said before, the 3 autonomies that should be given to universities have very quickly been taken over by the ministry within a few years. So they were still quite dependent on the ministry. But also the idea of having pluridisciplinary universities just disappeared. I just show here what happened between La Sorbonne, which disappeared in 1968. Nobody knows about it, but everybody thinks that they are still there, but no. In 1968, they destroyed the Sorbonne because the Sorbonne was made of the 4 faculties I mentioned here: Faculty of Medicine, Faculty of Humanities, Faculty of Sciences, Faculty of Law. They suppressed the faculty, and they wanted to do a kind of bricolage of all that to create new universities. That's what happened. Instead of the Sorbonne, we have 7 new universities which are created. But as you can see, I hope you can see because it's quite small, each of them has a very strong disciplinary orientation. So for instance, Paris 1 is about history, law, economics, and political science, while Paris 2 is about law, almost law, a little bit of economics. Paris 3 is humanities. So they didn't succeed in getting the different people into pluridisciplinary universities, and a lot of that is a construction which is based on political beliefs and political affiliation of people. So for instance, just to take this example, historians who were left-wing went to Paris 1, and the right-wing historians went to Paris 4. Okay, so a not very scientific way of organizing. So the only university which is pluridisciplinary is Paris 7 at that time, because the ministry forced them to be interdisciplinary. So it was really a top-down decision, otherwise the other. And what is true for Paris, of course, Paris is an extreme case, but it also happened in Strasbourg, where you had 3 universities, in Lille, where you had 3 universities, in Bordeaux, where you had 4 universities, so on. You know, a kind of distribution according to the disciplines and not a pluridisciplinary. But even with that, I think it's a very important step, because the universities in France, as we know them today, are the universities who came to birth in 1968, okay? So they are quite recent, I would say, compared to universities in Germany, even if they all write books about their history starting in the Middle Age. Don't believe them. In fact, they forget that they were suppressed for a quite long period, almost two centuries. It's not, it's quite important. But something which is also interesting is the fact that at that period, the mission of the university has changed in a way. And that comes from academics in the CNRS, so this national research institution, who thought we cannot go on with this separation between universities with not a lot of research and research institutions. We should look at some interesting centers in universities and label them as associated to the CNRS. Now they are called mixed. And so they sent some CNRS researchers some CNRS administrative staff, but also budget to these specific centers. And it's really the moment when research started to really develop in French universities. I don't say there was no research at all before, but at least that was not the main mission of universities. And my colleagues in France are always telling me, as university professors, we have to do research and teaching. And they do as if it has been the case forever, but it's not. And it started, in fact, quite late in the French system, even more in humanities and social sciences than in sciences, but nevertheless, we had that. But it really strengthened research within universities. So, if I now come back to my comparison between the two countries, after the students' movement, we can see some convergences. First of all, we can observe quite similar implications for the governance of universities. Before, the professors were deciding all together. Now they have, so there was a kind of direct democracy. Now they have to send representatives to the deliberative bodies where all the stakeholders are represented. So that's a big change in the two countries and something that universities have to learn about in order to be governed and to develop. And I think that in terms of expectations, they also have the same expectations coming from the state in the two countries, which is to be central in the democratization of higher education, and they really participated, universities participated to the massification of the two systems in the two countries. Nevertheless, when I started my PhD and developed research on higher education, comparing France and Germany, I nevertheless observed quite important differences in the way universities are interacting with the state or with public authorities in the two countries. One of my surprise when I looked at the way universities were working in France is that they were quite unable to make decisions. So you had something similar to a Senate, as you have here. But what I observe is that when decisions came to the Senate, they send it to the ministry, in fact, and the ministry has to decide for them. Or when, for instance, the budget was coming from the ministry, they were allowed to allocate the budget to the different parts of the university as they wanted, but they followed what the ministry suggested. There was a kind of, no decision in French universities, no feeling of belonging to a university. So in the 80s, so quite a long time after the 1968 recreation of universities, they were not working really very strongly. And they in fact hosted their academic staff. You know, they provided them with rooms, but there was no feeling of belonging to a university, to be part of a university. I always take this example, but when I led interviews in Germany, people were telling me, I'm professor of history at the University of. In France, they are just professor of history, point. No relation to the institution. The French universities, oh, sorry, that's because of the Wi-Fi. They are ruled by the minister. The minister is producing a lot of regulations, but universities are not recognized as the interlocutors of the ministry. The deans are still the interlocutors of the ministry. So we still have this very faculty-based system, despite the 1968 law and act. And the academic profession, by contrast, is very close to the ministry. And they interact a lot with the ministry. I was telling just before the conference that when I studied the public authorities in both countries, I was struck by the fact that in the Landministerien, there were no academics around. While in the French ministry, they were everywhere. You know, you can meet them all the time because they are themselves sometimes responsible for a direction, or they were participating to decision making. a complete different system in the two countries. And so, by contrast, the German universities were able to make decisions, collective decisions. They manage their staff, their academic staff, much more because of the market for professors. So it's only concerned the professors, but with the negotiation you have when you hire a professor, there is a kind of employment relationships through this process. They are ruled also in Germany by the ministers of land, but they have very close relationships to this minister. And so people always tell me, oh, you know, in France it's very centralized. That's true. It's very centralized, but centralization doesn't mean that you know what is going on very far away from you. Even in Paris, they don't really know what is going on in the Parisian universities. And you can imagine if you're very far from Paris, that is very difficult to control. A very different situation in Germany where I observe very close relationships between universities and the land ministries, and especially with the Referenten who are in charge of a university at the ministry level. So that's a moment when I develop the idea of university configurations in order to understand how universities work. And my conclusion is that when you are in a public system, universities never work completely in an independent way. If you want to understand how they work, you have at the same time to look at the relationships and the nature of the relationships they have with the ministry, but also the kind of relationships they have with the academic profession. What I can represent like that, that's in the 80s. So you have France on the left for you, and we have these strong relationships to the academic profession on the one hand. You have very weak relationships between academics and their universities, not very strong relationships between the ministry and the universities, because as I said, universities are not the interlocutors of the ministry. The deans, so the disciplines, so the academic profession in a way, are the real interlocutor of the ministry. While in Germany, you don't have a lot of relationships between the public authorities and the academics. You have rather close steering by the public authorities, and still now, I think you still have to ask the ministry when you want to create a new position, for instance. I think that's still the case, which it was the case in France. We had to ask the national ministry, but it's no longer the case. And you have this market relationship and employment relationships, I could say, between academics and universities. So the two systems are dealing quite differently with their universities and managing their systems quite differently. So if I now come to the current situation and the main changes that happened in the recent years, the first thing I would like to say is that in both countries, universities are going towards gaining more institutional autonomy, but that they also have to show more accountability towards the state. So I think the trend towards more institutional autonomy is again quite different between the two countries. And I would say that from my point of view, but you may disagree with that, we went a little further in the case of France than in the case of Germany, even if you look at the ranking or the survey, in fact, led by the European Association of Universities, or the Association of European Universities, about the autonomy of the universities in different countries, France is always very bad in this survey. But I think we had really very important change. The first one is something I will just mention very quickly, but for me, which is really a turning point in the French system, is the introduction of 4-year contracts between the state and each university by the end of the 80s. At that moment, the ministry, I say it like that, realized that there was a new act in 1968, and that they created universities, and that they should take these universities as interlocutor. And they decided not to have any contact with the dean, at least for some years, and to have the president of the university as interlocutor in order to negotiate the 4-year contracts. It was a kind of big change, not only at the university level, also at the ministry level, a very important one. So this was the first step, because universities were asked to write a project and to say what they would like to do during the next 4 years, and they received some funding in order to achieve that project. So for the first time, they were asked to have a kind of strategy to look at what they had done before, what they would like to do in the future. And some university presidents at that time, not all of them, of course, at the same time, but some of them really realized that they could have some strategy, that they could develop their governance at the university level. The second important moment is the Pécresse Act in 2007, which is called the Act for Liberty and Responsibility of French Universities, where the president has been given much more power and much more decision power than before, and again to develop the autonomy of universities. And I will finally mention the 2018 ordonnance, a very small thing in the legal system, but very important one, because some universities, it's only based on, it's very voluntary, it's a very voluntary movement, but if you want, as a university, not to respect the national act organizing universities, you can do it. Of course, with restrictions, there are things that you can do, things that you cannot do, but it means that today, French universities, which were run very similarly for years, can have quite different status from one university to another. Some of them are still working with the national regulation, as it is defined by an act, but others have introduced exceptions to that and have their own status, their own way of electing the president, for instance, their own way of composing their university board, you know, this kind of thing. So a system which was supposed to be national is in a way less and less national, in a different way of the German one. It's not federalism at all, it's not region-based, but it's based on the decision of some universities to apply for that and to be able to develop their own status and their own way of work, of functioning. I think that in Germany, the trend towards autonomy has been more diffuse. Of course, there is the introduction of the possibility of having more differences among lenders. So the different regulations in the different lender are quite different now. So sometimes you have presidents, sometimes you have rectors. The way the presidents are elected is not the same in all the lender. And sometimes I say there is no higher education system in Germany. There are as many higher education systems as lender in a way. So depending on where you are, you don't have exactly the same rules. There is also the introduction of Universitätsräte, that you did not have before, and which are also a quite big transformation of the way universities are working. And more autonomy has been given in the management of the academic staff, with the possibility to have tenure-track system or to transform the junior professor in professorship and so on. So more autonomy has been given to universities. But I think that fundamentally the movement in France has been larger, but maybe because we are coming from further than the German system. At the same time in France, and again, I see here a quite big difference with Germany, we have much more top-down decision coming from the ministry. And especially the French government, not only the ministry, the French government is really pushing universities towards a transformation of the training programs, and they are putting a lot of emphasis in training programs that will prepare to what they call the jobs of the future. And that's something quite new, because until then, I would say that the ministry was quite not really trying to intervene on this sector. That's something which is quite new, and again, coming from the top. But it's especially about research program that we have quite important changes. Many research programs are now decided at a level I cannot really identify, I must say, and I discussed about that with a colleague very recently. We don't know exactly where these research priorities are coming from. Is it directly from the Élysée and Emmanuel Macron? Is it coming from Matignon? Is it coming from one committee we don't know about? We don't really know. But a lot of research programs are funded, and quite well funded, somewhere, with decisions we don't really know about, and in a way, decisions which are not led by the Research Council that has been created by the Pécresse Act, the ANR, our DFG, which is now almost only responsible for blue sky research. But a lot of money is also spent on priorities. And so, again, quite a big difference, I would say. And a much more interventionist state in France than in Germany, from this point of view. I would say also that, and probably the difference between France and Germany is not that big. There are more and more instrumental expectations put on universities. I'm sure, at least for France, that they are always asked, as I said before, to train students for their future job. And they forget all the time about all the other missions that we have to the students. And that, from my point of view, are also very important. Training students for job, don't misunderstand me, is crucial. It's part of our job. But it's not the only mission that we have towards the students. And the other missions are completely forgotten. It's as if they were not there. I think that here, about this kind of movement, where you have more top-down decisions coming from the government, we have to think about the capacity of universities, the capacity of academics to resist and to influence this kind of decisions. And here I see two possibilities. I think that the role of buffer bodies is very important. And you have the chance in Germany to have the Wissenschaftsrat. You may be critical of the Wissenschaftsrat and think that, but at the same time, I think from what I saw, it's really acting as a kind of buffer body, producing some advices, being involved in the policy making and so on, and in that way protecting a little bit universities from a direct intervention from the state or from the lender. We have the ANR in France, but as I said, they in a way lost the control over the priority research programs for the moment, at least. So. And I think that, we discussed that's also part of it. I think that professional associations, what I mean by professional association is the association of political scientists, the association of physicists, the association, et cetera, they could play a role into that. But to do that, they have to be strong. And in my country, they are not strong at all. They have never been strong. The union representatives, the people sitting in the national bodies were the strong academic, being always in relationships to the ministry, not the professional associations. And so how to get these associations to play a role in this evolution is really, for me, a big issue. With this trend towards more autonomy, there is also a trend towards more accountability. And that's something which is really the same in our two countries. The first thing is the introduction of performance in the allocation of budgets. So we are not only looking at what is the number of students, what is the number of what is the surfaces that are to be hit and so on. We also have a part of the budget which is depending on the performance that you have achieved, and that's something which is quite new and which has been introduced by the public policies. Attention is also very much provided to rankings, even if everybody tells you that they are not very scientifically granted and that really they are not really they are not exact, that we shouldn't take them on board, but nevertheless, the public authorities are taking them in their reflection, they take care about it, and so that's something which we have always to show that we are good in the rankings, that we are performing, and so on. And so, more than that, it's probably the immediate value for money, which is something which has become very strong. It's not only that you have to show that you use correctly the money you get, that I find it quite normal. It's also that you have to show that there are immediate impact of what you are producing, of your teaching, of your research. And this pressure, this is a lot of pressure on universities about that. The last point I wanted to develop is about the fact that the state has transformed itself into a competition organizer in the two countries. And here again, I will compare your excellence initiative and my excellence initiative, mon initiative d'excellence. In the two countries, I think that it relies on the same belief that competition is an excellent instrument to identify and promote international champions. And that we should concentrate supplementary resources on those who are excellent. That's particularly true in the French system, but I know that was the same in Germany, and it's still a little bit the case in Germany. In France, we had the idea that all universities were equivalent. I say equivalent not to say equal or not to say that they were the same, but the idea was that if you study there or there, it's the same. If you get a diploma here or here, it's the same. If you're a professor here or there, it's the same. It was not true. We already had a kind of hierarchy, but it was not transparent. Nobody told about it, or very softly. You don't dare telling that there was some universities that were better than yours or something like that. You know, that was not. But it was the principle was really equivalence. Now, the idea, and when I say now, in France, it really started around 2005. The idea is that we shouldn't give to all the same amount of money, but we should concentrate money on some. And again, that's very close to the German Excellence Initiative with the idea that you have to identify champions and to provide them with supplementary funding. So there are many similarities also in the way this policy has been led. First of all, in both countries, and I can tell it in a way because I was part of the Strategiekommission in Germany and was part of the decision about the Zukunftskonzept in 2012. There was a strong focus on strengthening the governance of universities. So in the project, the universities had to show that the presidency was able to make decisions, to set priorities, to have a strong strategy. So, and we have the same in the French calls. You have to show that you have a strong university governance. And the projects, they must set priorities. They must say, this is where we will put more money. This is where we are excellent. This is where we can compare with this and that universities. And in general, you already know the name of the universities that you want to be compared to. So always the same names coming in the different projects, of course. And there is also an increased expectation or a strong expectation for more internationalization of the system, more international students, more international academics, more classes in English, this kind of things. It's really the same in the two countries. Nevertheless, I again see a lot of differences in the two systems and in their consequences. In Germany, from what I saw, maybe it changed afterwards, but from what I saw, scientific achievement or potential was central in the decision made to choose one or this university as a Zukunft concept. I say potential or achievement because it was a quite recurrent discussion among the members of the Strategie Commission. Should we take into account only the achievement, so they are excellent, so they will remain excellent, or should we look at the potential? They are maybe not till there, but they are able to go there. And so there was almost a discussion, but it was always about the scientific results or the achievement or the potential. What I also observe in Germany, now maybe I will switch to France immediately. In France, we looked at the initiative, the excellence initiative in Germany. Many people spent some months and discuss with people in Germany in order to organize our excellence initiative. But we have a mix of objectives in the calls. In the call, you are asked simultaneously to show that you have an excellent scientific record, but also that you will have institutional objectives. And the winners are all scientifically okay. But what made the difference was the strength of the governance in the project. So if you consider that they are all quite equal in terms of their scientific level, you had excellent universities in terms of science which have not been chosen because their project was too weak in terms of governance and in terms of what they wanted to do. And there was also, I won't insist on that because that will be too long, but they wanted institutions to answer to the call together and to show not only that they will work together, but that they will probably become more integrated, not to say that they will merge. That was the expectation that was that really drove the way they make the decision about who would be an IDEX, we say IDEX, not Zukunft concept, or not. With the fact that a place like Toulouse, which is excellent in terms of research, has no IDEX, or Lyon, for instance, which is also quite reputed in terms of science, and other places, which were not maybe as good in terms of scientific research, were selected at the first round, for instance. So it created a kind of new competitive order, as we called it with my colleague Jérôme Oost, because it was not only based on excellence in science, but also on institutional projects. A second difference, which is, from my point of view, very, very strong, is that in Germany, it's a time-limited allocation of resources. You have to compete again and again and again to remain a Zukunft concept. In France, once you have been evaluated 4 years after you got the label, if you are positively evaluated, you are confirmed forever, which means that you will receive more money every year. Every year. Every year. There is no end, no stop. Maybe a government could say we stop, but for the moment at least there is nothing like that. Some project failed after the 4-year evaluation, but those who pass this evaluation, they are IDEX forever. And what I also observe is that in France, because most of the resources are coming from the state, from the national state, the region have not been very active in this process. While in Germany, I observe that many lenders try to support the universities that fail in order to help them winning the next round. So there was a strong support from the lender to the universities. Maybe not all of them, but at least when they saw that there was a potential to get a Zukunft concept, they provided resources to the universities. We don't have that in the French case. And from that point of view, I think that the process of the Excellence Initiative in France has had a stronger impact on the differentiation of the French system than in the German system. Because you have this long-term allocation of money, of budget. And that even if they introduce a new call in order to soften, I would say, the old project, the old process. So the other call is called ECIT. So that's for universities that are excellent on a specific area, okay? And we have 8 ECIT and we have 9 IDEX. But nevertheless, I think that the differentiation process, at the same time a horizontal differentiation, with universities more oriented towards research and others not that much, and a vertical stratification between among the universities in the French system, which is really a big transformation for this country. Why doesn't it work? Yes. The second point I would like to add about that is it seems to me that there were more limitations of competition in Germany than in France. In France, we had this competition for excellent universities, but I couldn't list, or if I do it, it will be a kind of à la Prévert list. You know, you list the number of institutional calls, national institutional calls, which have been led at the national level. Trying to get all universities into the competitive game. So we had plenty of national calls on top of the IDEX and ECIT and LabEx and Equipex and so on and so on. We had many, many of them. Very few about training, as in Germany, but many of them on research or sustainability, innovation, and so on. Plenty of them. So a kind of multiple competition, to take the expression used by my colleagues at InShare, but much more multiple, I would say, than in Germany. And the national selective calls have become a real public policy instrument in the case of France. And it has had a classification effect. What did the 9 IDEX do? They created their association. It's called UDIS. Because there was supposed to be 10 at the beginning, and so on, and this is 10 in French. Huh? So it's called UDIS. And what happens? The UDIS is part of the Conference of University Presidents. Okay. But within the university, this Conference of University Presidents the ECID said, we should have our own association. So they created what they call initiative. So you have IDIS, initiative, and you can be part of initiative only if you are an ECID. For UDIS, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's closer to the IDEX. And the others, they created an association called OREF, Association of Universities Doing Training and Research, something like that. So the University President Conference, the Conference of University Presidents, is still there. It's called now France Université. But it's within this big conference, you have small parts which are trying to get their own lobbying relationships to the ministry, which are producing their own report about what should be done in terms of reforms of the French system. And the ministry is starting to recognize them. In the last committee I read the composition of, at the ministry level, to think about, I don't know what. They want to have a reflection on a specific issue. They bring people together there in order to think about it. There is a representative of the university, the conference of the university president, but there is also a representative of the UDIS. So when I speak about a classification effect, you see what I mean, in fact. If you are the winner of this kind of game, and if this game is rather stable, which is the case, you create classes of institutions that you did not have before. And of course, there is a lot of competition fatigue. As you can imagine, there were so many calls all the time, and all universities, because they need money, were competing for them. So the competitive game was a kind of permanent game in the French universities, not only at certain point of time. It was every year a new call that you wanted to win in order to have more money. In the case of Germany, I think I already mentioned the counterpoint role, I think, of the lender. First of all, because they were not very happy with this excellence initiative, but not only. And I think also that this notion of distributed excellence, this narrative about distributed excellence that was pushed by the Hochschulrektoren Conference, it was also important. The idea that there is excellence everywhere. It's distributed. It's not the same, and so on. I never heard about that in the French case. No. I think that was a way to soften the competitive game. And finally, when I look at what is going on in France, where all universities are trying to get something in the national calls, what I observe, at least in the call I participated to, is that many universities decided not to go for the Zukunftskonzept competition. So less, maybe, engagement in this game than in Germany than in France. What is the impact of this competition on universities? And here I'm speaking only of the French universities, because Audrey Haroche, who finished her PhD, looked at what happened in an IDEX, not easy to say, in terms of a transformation. And we also looked at we also compared some IDEX, Audrey and I. It's clear that with this process, it strengthens quite a lot the university governance, because the presidency wanted to be part of the game, and they were really engaged in these multiple calls. They became kind of competitors themselves, because they had to if they wanted to have more money for their university. But what also happened is that the institutional objective of the calls pushed universities to merge. Can you imagine how many mergers we have had in the recent years? No idea? In France, did you remark that we have less and less universities? 14. 14 times something like Duisburg-Essen. This involved 30 former universities. And I don't remember the number, it's 17 other institutions. Because the mergers are not only among universities, they also sometimes embark grandes écoles. So, 14 mergers, engaging 30 former universities and 17 other institutions into that process. And this is closely linked to this excellence initiative. It doesn't mean that it always worked. And here I want to mention some things that we observed with Audrey. First of all, most of the time the projects have been prepared very quickly, much more quickly than the German process, which is very long. In France, we had maybe 6 months to prepare the project. So the presidencies, they work together in secret, and they produce a very nice project. And then they presented the project to the jury, the international jury. There was no visit on site, so no contact to the people at the university, in the universities. They finally won, wow. And then the people in the universities discovered the project that had been sold for them. And in many cases, and I'm thinking of Toulouse and Lyon, which I mentioned before, they said, no, we won't. There was also big differences according to the kind of universities you had. In universities where the scientific background was very strong, during the implementation of the edicts, they had to count on the academics. They couldn't do without them. In other cases, the university presidency could really impose their vision, and that makes some difference between the universities. I think that these two processes, these excellent initiatives in the two countries, also have quite important consequences for the funding system in both countries. In France, we speak of the Ministry of the Ordinary and Ministry of the Extraordinary. The Ministry of the Ordinary is the Minister for Higher Education. This ministry has the normal budget it has always had, with small decrease, small increase according to the year. Close to the Prime Minister, they created a specific office with a lot of people working there. And this is where they put the extra money, where they think of the next course they could organize for French universities. I know it's not the same in Germany. You don't have this separation between the Ministry of the Ordinary and the Ministry of the Extraordinary. But nevertheless, the idea of the Excellence Initiative is that you have the running budget, the normal budget, but you have extra money that you will distribute on a competitive basis. And so there is the normal budget, and this one is decreasing. And I know there are big cuts right now in Germany, but we have the same for years in France. The level of euros per student has decreased dramatically in France in the last years, while at the same time you had these big calls run by the Ministry of Extraordinary and bringing more money to some of the institutions. So it has a clear impact on the decrease of the ordinary budget. And we can also see that there are more money, there are more resources for discipline with an immediate impact or greater opportunities for private funding, which of course is quite challenging for disciplines like the social sciences and even more for the humanities, who have more problem to get in touch with the public funding or to defend themselves in front of the, because it's more difficult to show your immediate impact. So quickly, some concluding remarks, 4, sorry. What I try to show in this talk is that the expectations from public authorities, but also the relationships between the state, these public authorities and universities, have always been evolving over time. It's not something which is stable at all. It's always moving back and forth with new instruments, with new ways, with new expectations. I again will insist on the fact that the idea of university in these relationships has become more and more instrumental. We expect universities, the state, the public authorities, expect more and more from universities that they produce something, that they participate to something. I don't say we shouldn't. I just said that it's maybe going too far in this direction. At the same time, the idea of university has become more plural. It's partly because our systems are bigger and bigger, and of course, students do not have all the same expectations. The training programs are so different, so large now that they are going to different directions. So maybe it's not the idea of universities which is plural, but universities are plural, and that's part of the differentiation process, and that's something which, for countries like France and Germany, where it wasn't the case, that's something which is difficult to implement and to develop, but it's something which is going on. I think, and that's my personal opinion, I think that we cannot reduce the competition among us. That will be sharper and sharper, and we can see it from the reduction of the budgets. The competition between the disciplines will be quite difficult in the coming years, because when you have less budget, it becomes more difficult. The competition for students will probably also increase and be more difficult. I think that it will be very difficult to avoid this process. That's not something on which we have a lot of impact. But at least we can try to develop common principles to which we are attached, and that should be respected in this new game that we are engaged in. No, we have to do it. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward for the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this inspiring talk. And I have the pleasure to open our discussion. I would like to pick up, you started with a short history comparing the two systems, and now looking into Germany, and you already mentioned that we're getting more and more instrumental, and they define more instrumental goal for higher education system. The interesting thing that in Germany, they clearly stated that they want the freedom of teaching and research was shortly after Germany has been going through the Nazi regime. Mm-hmm. And they were clear political statements saying to resist this populism, to resist this, anti-democratic point, we need strong universities. At that point, there were a clear idea of we need a university to protect our, our people from falling back. And now, seeing increasing the populism around the world, they cut it down. So do you have any thoughts how we can resist, how we can give the university the voice back? Not only from inside, but maybe in a broader, collective sense.
I think you exactly pronounced the important word, which is collective. And as I said at the end, the competition is there. It's not a competition that came like that. It's something which has been organized by the state. That's the reason why I said that the state or the public authorities are have become competition organizers. They were setting rules before. They now use a new instrument, which is competition, with limits, because they nevertheless see the limits. For instance, in the French case, they want to reduce the number of selective calls because they think that it's not going in the right direction. It's too many. There are too many of them. So, but nevertheless, the idea that you should have a selective process is still there. So that's something that will be that is there. And of course, the consequence of that is that universities are looking at themselves rather than at others. And also countries are looking at themselves instead of others. When I look at the European higher education system, I think it doesn't exist. And it exists less and less. And the reason why I say that is that it's exactly what happens between universities. It happens at the European level between the countries. When a reform is led in France, we don't look at the other countries in Europe. The reform is led in order to be on the top of the international scene, We are not looking at what the others have done and whether what we are doing could be compatible with what our neighbor countries are doing. We do ourselves with our own, we don't. So we say we look at the international level, because if you don't say that, you're not very convincing. But at the same time, we don't. So just let me take an example, and I come back to your question, don't worry. We have tenure tracks in France now. You have tenure tracks. They do not work the same way. We are like that, France and Germany. Why didn't they could have looked at others, and we could have tried to do the same thing together. And even not only France and Germany. There is a book edited by two Finnish colleagues about the development of tenure tracks in Europe. And in the introduction, they show how different it is. So you have tenure tracks now everywhere, but they are not developed the same way. So what is going on among universities is going on with the same path at the level of the countries. And here, the only solution for me is to be more collective. And what I described about the French universities with the UDIS, the initiative, the OREF, is terrible. Because when a university is under attack in terms of academic freedom, right now there is an historian professor at the University of Nantes who got an ERC, a synergy in ERC, about the impact of the Quran in Europe from the Middle Age to I don't know when. Some representatives of the Rassemblement National at the EU level are telling the ERC that they shouldn't fund such a research. Okay, who is supporting what is going on at the University of Nantes? Is there any collective action from the French universities to protect, to say it cannot go that way, we should do something? So I think that the main problem is really that. It's very difficult for universities to act collectively today. And we see it in the US. They are all trying to negotiate with the government in order to save themselves.
Independently.
And they're independently of what is going on in the other. Yeah. So I don't know what, I know the solution, but I don't know how to
come back
to have a movement towards that. How to go further than our own interests as institutions and have a clear. That's the reason why I mentioned some principles at the end. I think that's the only way to try to fight against that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing and describing it. And I would like to go down like now we talked on a macro level, right? And if you look at the organization at the universities, it seems like there's a similar process going on, because at some talk you mentioned that you believe that the university, they are not actors. They cannot act because they're existing of different single researchers or faculty deans and so on. So the university itself is not an actor. So I guess it's the same if we are looking at the whole process and the push and the pressure into the higher education system. Do we need stronger universities as actors, or do we need less?
Stronger, it depends on what you mean by stronger. If you mean that we need universities with strong top-down leadership, I would say no. If we need universities with collective solidarity, I say yes. So I think that the point is not so much strong, but strong on what.
How can we manage?
And what I mentioned in Kassel, but also here about the French system, is that universities are still specific organizations. You cannot manage them as other organizations. So it's already difficult to manage any kind of organization, but I think that for universities, it's even stronger. Because, first of all, as academics, we have always the possibility to get funding without our institution. And the more DFG money there is, the more independent you are as an academic. So presidents have to deal with that. So what you can try to do is much more to bring people together. And that's very difficult, of course. But that's the only way you can really try to be strong. You won't be an actor because, of course, you have different interests, you have different disciplines. There are people who are not, even within a discipline, people are not okay with the epistemological or whatever, But if you can bring people together and the fact of having a feeling of belonging to something which is common, I wouldn't speak of a scientific ethos or something like that with the Mertonian vision of that, which for me is very updated and old-dated. But something that brings people together, that's more difficult to do. Because
it is very difficult because of the cut-downs. It's getting harder.
It relies on narratives, on vision, things that are...
And that at some points, I think we have to come back to shared values and to be aware. But that I start with my questions, but I'm very happy to involve more people. Yes, Andreas Langenol from our Sociologie. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for your presentation, which I found very fascinating. Also, and crucially, including the concept of university configurations. And so my first question would be whether you would say that students also are a kind of organizational hub in that university configurations, or whether from the perspective of that concept they rather would look like a demography or a population or a kind of environment for the university system. And then at the same time, I guess I would also have a kind of commentary on what you just said about the necessity to mobilize collective resources or resources for collective coordinated action, because it seems to me that there's a strong interaction between the possibility of mobilizing those resources for collective action on the one hand, and the way, on the other hand, we organize competition between the universities, because competition can take many different forms. This can be, the classical the neoclassical model of constant competition and a market, as it were, but it can also be a kind of winner-takes-all market, which is quite different, I think, from this kind of neoclassical notion of competition and market. And I was just interested in your thoughts on the interactions between we organize competition in the university sector and how we organize collective solidarities. Thank you.
The university configuration is not supposed to represent all the stakeholders which are part of a university system. It was much more, the idea that I had was much more to try to understand the relationships to public authorities in public system. And in fact, if I come back to why did I develop this idea? It started with the Burton-Clark triangle. I don't know whether it's something which is very well known in higher education studies, but not in sociology in general. So Burton-Clark, who was a sociologist, compared different countries, and he has a triangle of coordination, telling that in some countries the state is leading the higher education system, in some countries, the US of course, is the market, and in some countries it's the oligarchy of professors. And I started with that, and I thought, oh, that's nice, but it's only reflect the steering of universities. What I observe in my own country is that there is also a steering of the academic profession. And it is different from what is going on in Germany. So we have to take on board also the academic profession in order to understand this steering of higher education. But it doesn't mean that, again, all stakeholders are represented in that. It's only a focus on these specific relationships. Nevertheless, I should add, when I started to work on universities for my PhD, I had the intention to have a lot of interviews also with the students. And as my central focus was on university governance, how you make decisions in universities, how do the deliberative bodies work, and so on, I must say that very quickly I decided not to see so many students because they were so ignored by everybody on this, on this perspective. You know, that most of the time I said that it's myself who is bringing the student back in the interviews rather than something which is spontaneous. But I agree with you that competition could be winner takes all. And if you go very far in this direction, it doesn't work with universities. But of course, with firms, you can kill all the competitors with that, and you have no competitors at all. Or you can have very specific competitive game, like the competitive game for music stars or movie stars, where you have also kind of winner-take-all situation. So you invest on someone, this person is successful, and all the others will kind of disappear, or not being very important. So these are kinds of competitions which have been studied and which are quite well known. I won't say it's the same for universities, because you don't kill universities. They don't disappear. You lose the competition, but you're still there. It just means that you won't have the resources to develop some of the activities you had before. And if I go very strong in this direction, it could happen. It's really a cult. It could happen that in a quite long future, but in France, we will have universities specialized in research, so the so-called research universities, and others that will be much more teaching institutions. We already see it a little bit at the master level, where some universities lose their best master students who are trying to go to universities with more prestige. So, but nevertheless, you remain as an institution. So it's not winner take all from this point of view, I would say. But of course, the concept competition would be, or competition where it's not, from my point of view, competition is always linked to a kind of cooperation. You don't have competition without cooperation. And probably it's the cooperative part of the competition that we could try to develop, but you cannot do, it's a problem of collective action. If you are the only one doing that, you lose. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how to escape that, really. It's really, for me, it's a Manco-Olsen problem. So, you know, the collective action, how to get everybody to play the same game so that you're not the only one and that you are the loser. That's a very well-known situation in sociology or in economics. Yeah. Yeah.
We actually have two more.
Sorry.
That is good. So I would like to bring them together.
Okay.
So there was someone on the left side. Yeah.
The micro is coming.
My question goes in the same direction. The word competition has mentioned so often by now. Mm-hmm. So competition can be on many, many levels. And there is a competition for students, I take from your speech. Mm-hmm. So how could universities improve their competition for students? And what does the European Union do for the universities? Just support for research? What is the competition for European-funded research? Is there, I think there is a cooperation between countries because funds are only given if there is a cooperation between, let's say, 3 countries. So there is, cooperation is in the system already. And another question, how do you assess the Bologna process, which was implemented in the 90s?
Would it be all right to bring both questions together?
Yes, I will try.
Yeah, that's there was someone right here.
This is only an extension of that what Professor Hoffmann told. I made the experience when I tried to study medicine in France that the system was completely different. It's the same system applies to the veterinary medicine where I was engaged as a biochemist. There is an aspect of political aspect in the system. If we want to build a European Union, we need to have exchange of scientists and students, and it is impossible for to interact in the field of medicine, students of medicine and students of veterinary medicine with the universities in cooperation. It's impossible because the systems do not allow it. So there might be different other systems or studies as well in such a situation, but I think we need to have an agreement in the future how to have a European system in it. Thank you.
I think that's
Yes. I more than agree with the fact that we should try to have a European system. But as I said, for the moment, I don't see it. And I really think that there are more and more divergences between the countries in terms of higher education than there are similarities and convergences. So I'm quite pessimistic about that. We have a lot of exchanges of students, of academics, more and more. It's funded by the EU or also by the countries. But nevertheless, the systems remain very different. And what I said just before about the tenure tracks, I think we always, all the time, miss good opportunities where we could really have a joint action between the different countries instead of developing each our own solution. But we haven't done it. So yeah, I agree we should have this system, but sometimes I think that we should have a Bologna for academic careers, that we should not something like the Bologna process, trying to bring the academic careers closer in order to favor more exchanges, more long-term exchanges, not only having a visiting professorship, but yeah, nobody wants to do that for the moment. And I agree with you that with the research funding at the EU level, there are cooperation. It's much more than that. You're obliged to cooperate. And if you go for a project with only 3 countries, I can tell you, you lose. If you don't have 7 or 8. Yeah. And we saw it with the alliances. We started in my alliance, Civica, we started, I think, with 8 institutions. Now we are 11. Because we applied again when they said, if you are more, we will get you more money. So I think there is this pressure for cooperation, that's true. But at the same time, it's a competition for that. So it's a mix of competition all the time. But as a sociologist, I wrote a little bit on competition, and I always said there is no antagonism between competition and cooperation. In order to compete, you first have to cooperate with the rules, be okay with the rule, agree with the rules of the competition. The competition itself creates classification, and what happens with new classes, they coordinate together. So there is always a mix between it, but I'm not sure that what is going on at the EU level is sufficient. And anyway, the EU can only make decisions about research, but not about higher education. And I'm not sure that the policy that they will deliver, if they had the competency on higher education, will be the best one. But that's another issue. I will stop here.
Yes, actually, I have to, manage the time, and we are in the end. I think I would like to finish with a little bit more optimistic, because I'm deeply convinced that we have European higher education. It's quite, it's varying even in one country, but we have some, some movement, we have exchanges, we have, I could apply in France for a professorship, and I'm sure you would be more than welcome in Germany. So I think we have a European higher education system, but it's quite diverse, which might be also a positive thing.
I completely agree. I don't, when I mean a European system, I don't mean something which is everywhere the same.
We have the same positions.
So I think that would be wrong. That would be wrong. But at least less differences nevertheless, because right now it's quite difficult, and that's what you said, for students to go from one system to another, or to move quickly, or for academics, it's also just pensions, there are so many obstacles. So I think that in the US you have 50 different state systems. They are very different to the way they are managed, but they are, nevertheless, they only have one academic labor market, and that brings everything together. Many norms and principles are the same all over the place, and that's what we are missing, I think. But we will.
The US is quite interesting anyway. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge.
The discussion.
So, I would also like to point out that I hopefully will see you again in 2 weeks here, because then is Alex Usher with us, and we continue to talk about university and the pressure and the reforms which are going on. Thank you to you all, and also for the people who are online, and looking forward to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.